In the series of bold claims that we've looked at, I think last week was probably the boldest of bold claims when Jesus says, I am going to die by crucifixion, but I'm not going to stay dead. I am going to be resurrected back to life. And sure enough, there's a group of friends that come to the tomb expecting to find a dead body, but instead they find angels who say, He is not here, He is risen, just as He said. And so because of that, we now know that Jesus holds the keys to death and the grave, that He says, I am the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He's the undisputed champion. He takes a back seat to no one. He has won. Now, for you and I, we might expect that it would be time for a victory lap. I mean, can you imagine if Jesus walked back into where the Sanhedrin was meeting, said, hey guys, remember me? Or if he walked into the courtroom where Governor Pontius Pilate was and said, hey, remember me? You condemned me to death, and you even got the report from the centurion that I was dead. Well, guess what? Here I am. I mean, we would love that kind of stuff. I think we like the victory lap because it sort of feels good to us, like we can justify that we were right all along. But here's the thing. Jesus isn't done with us running this race yet. No, His victory over death and the grave is an important, vital, absolutely indispensable part, but it wasn't the end of the race, even though His disciples kind of thought that it was. See, when they're gathered together with Him, and this is just before Jesus is going to ascend back into heaven, they ask Him a question, and this question really is, if to put it in kind of our modern day language, is saying, are we going to get to see the victory lap ourselves? Here's what they said. Then they gathered around Him and they asked Him, Lord, are you at this time? In other words, they wanted to see it right now, at this time, going to restore the kingdom to Israel. In other words, they were saying, we want to see this happen. We want to see the vindication of all of this that was going on. And Jesus said, your time frame is not the same as the Father's. The Father has a perfect time in mind. And it's not for you to try to figure out what that is, but there's something else for you to do instead. You see, here's the danger. When we think, oh, the race is done, I'm at the end, I can coast, I can let up, I don't really have to work at this anymore, that's when we're in danger of stumbling. That's when we're in danger of missing out on what we're really supposed to be doing. Take a look at this quick video. This runner that's out in front is a senior. His name is Tengoy Papoy, and he started celebrating his win just a bit too early. And as a result, he allows Marin Simon to pass him just at the finish line and edge him out. Right there at the end where he thought that he had it, he began to let up, and he was asking for the applause of the people there. And he stopped paying attention to the finish line that he needed to cross. Last week we talked about if Jesus makes this promise, I am going to be crucified and I am going to be raised back to life, that because of that, because He actually did it, then we can bank on all of these other promises that are in the Word. One of the promises we looked at last week was one that Jesus gave to His disciples when they were seeming a bit nervous. What's going to happen next? And Jesus said, let me show you the finish line. It's all prepared for you. Let me tell you about it. We looked at this in John chapter 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, and this is a great claim that He's making, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, and here's another great promise, I will come back. I will, not I might, but I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. Now, to be at home with Jesus, to be in that place that He has prepared for us, to be there forever and ever in His presence, no more having to deal with the disease and sickness in these frail human bodies, to deal with the sin that plagues us and all of those problems that we have here on earth. That truly is to cross the finish line and to be there forever. And we've won, but we're not there yet. The reason why I know that is because I'm still sitting here and you're still sitting there as well. We're still here, which means the race is still ongoing. Now, make no mistake about it. the death and the resurrection of Jesus is a very important thing. It's an indispensable part of this race, but it's not the end of the race. We don't just let up and coast now. We have to keep running until we cross the finish line. So there's one more bold claim that we need to look at to make sure that we finish well. Jesus was having a conversation with his disciples. It's in Matthew chapter 24. It says, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. In other words, they said, Jesus, look at all of this. Isn't this amazing? Here's Jesus' reply. Do you see all these things? He asked. I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. In other words, what you see right here is temporal. This isn't the end. This isn't the final. Now remember, what they asked there in Acts chapter 1. Is this the time you're going to restore this? Is this Jerusalem now going to be the capital once again for your kingdom here? And he says, no, these stone buildings that you see, they're going to collapse. Goes on here. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? In other words, how can we know that we've gotten to the finish line? Or how do we know that the finish line is getting close? Now, Jesus begins to tell them a lot of things that they're going to see as they get close to the finish line. But he also tells us what the finish line is, how we know that we can finally get there. He says it in verse number 14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Did you hear what he said here? When does the end come? When the gospel, the good news about Jesus, the good news about how he can radically change somebody's life and turn them from hell to heaven, to turn them from the judgment that is against them, to have that canceled because they've placed their faith in what Jesus did on the cross. That's the good news. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Then we will get to the finish line. The finish line isn't here yet, but that's how you'll know you get to the finish line, when everybody has had a chance to hear the good news. Now, Jesus really sums up what we're supposed to be doing in running this race in just one word, and that word is obedience. We're to obey everything that he's told us. Let me take you to John's gospel, the same John chapter 14 that we just looked at, where he said, I have the end prepared for you. I have the final home prepared for you, and I will come back to get you. But in the meantime, you have to keep running this race. So in John chapter 14, look at verse number 19. Before long, the world will not see me anymore. The world will not see me anymore. Jesus is going to ascend back into heaven, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will realize that I am in the Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. I love that he's right there with us. Whoever has my commands and obeys them is the one who loves me. He who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him. So Jesus said, here's how you're going to show to the world that I am in you and you are in me and I've taken you into the Father, is that you are going to obey what I have told you to do. What did he just tell us in Matthew chapter 24? What's the end goal? That the whole world has a chance to hear the good news, the gospel. So let me back up in John chapter 14, the verses just preceding this, because Jesus is saying, I'm going to help you obey. I'm going to help you carry out this mandate. He says this, if you love me, you will obey what I command. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. And then I love this last phrase, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. So Jesus says you have a task to do. You have to continue running this race. Now, Jesus says, I have assured you what the end of the race is going to be, the finish line. But when are you going to get there? When do you get to go home? When the gospel has been preached. That's when the end comes. Now, here is an amazing thing, and this is really the bold claim that we want to look at, is that in order for us to do this, Jesus said, you can't do it. I can't do it in the name of Craig. You can't do it in your own authority. You and I don't have the capacity to do that. And this bold claim is that Jesus says, I'm going to give you my authority to go and preach the gospel, and even to perform miracles and wonders that are going to confirm the fact that you are preaching the gospel. Here's what he says in Matthew chapter 28. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That's why we said earlier, he's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the undisputed victor. All of that authority has been given to me. And then he says, therefore. So what do we do with all of his authority? Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. When will the end come? When the gospel has been preached to all nations. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Just like what he said, I'm not going to leave you as orphans. So he's giving us his authority to go. He says, you're going in my name. And sure enough, that is what we see. Now, here's what Jesus tells us even more specifically of how the Holy Spirit is going to help us with this. Right on the heels of when they said, Jesus, is this the time that you're going to restore the kingdom? He says, let's not focus on that. I want you to focus on the mission. Don't start running your victory lap now, but focus on the finish line of telling all of the nations the good news. Stay obedient to me in that. And here's how the Holy Spirit is going to help you. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be, not just you will do, but you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the world. In other words, to all nations. He empowers us to do that. And when we go right from there, that's in Acts chapter 1. The Holy Spirit falls in Acts chapter 2. And before we've even left that chapter, we hear people talking about the authority of Jesus. We hear them speaking boldly in the authority of Jesus. Peter preaches a sermon and says, there is no other way that you can step into this relationship with God except through Jesus. When they heal a lame man, they said, we've done this in the name and the authority of Jesus. When the Sanhedrin tells them to stop preaching that way, they said, we can't help but talk about Jesus. The authority that we have, the empowerment we have through Jesus, through the Holy Spirit, is to keep proclaiming his name everywhere we go, to keep running this race. As he says again, you have to obey. What is my command to you? Therefore, go. It's not optional. He doesn't say, if you feel like it, go. But he says, I am commissioning all of you. If you want to get to the finish line, keep going and telling people. I like this analogy of a race, and that's why I've used it a lot here, because it's something that gets picked up throughout the Bible as well. Paul uses it especially in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Listen to this. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Think about that video that I showed you earlier. One guy was right on the edge of getting the prize, but he began to celebrate too soon. He began to take up his victory lap, and he didn't get first place. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, here's another therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. In other words, I'll not let up and start coasting to take my victory lap, and then I miss out right at the very end. So let me give you, as I look through this passage here, I see 3 don'ts and 3 do's for us running the race. The first don't that I see here is don't fail to train. Don't fail to train. Now, there are some people that just think that, well, I prayed a prayer once, I invited Jesus into my life, asked him to forgive my sins, and I'm good now. But instead, what we need to do is say, I need to keep training. The Bible talks about itself being a great training manual for us. It's what trains us to live in all godliness. So don't fail to train. The second don't that I see here is, he says, do not run aimlessly. I don't run like a man running aimlessly. What's aimlessly? Without a purpose. It's just kind of getting up and saying, I wonder what I'm going to do today. No, it's running with a purpose is getting up and saying, I know what I'm going to do today. I'm on mission today. I'm going to run on purpose today. And the third don't that I see here, Paul said it in his last line. He says, I don't want to be disqualified for the prize. Well, what's disqualifying him? Well, I think we go up a little bit, and he says, these are people that are running for the earthly crown because you get distracted. Just like that runner that we saw, that he got distracted. He wasn't looking at the finish line anymore. He was looking over to the crowd and saying, hey, why don't you guys give me some applause? He was living for that applause, and he wasn't looking at the finish line. So let's look at 3 do's that we have in here. The first do is to go into strict training. He says, I beat my body and I make it my slave. I go into strict training with this. I know that the time is short, so I got to train hard for the race that I have before me. I want to make sure that I run it well. The second do that I have that I see in here is to stay focused. To stay focused on this. He says, I go into this strict training because I want to make sure that every movement, every word, every thought, every action is on mission. That I'm not scattered. I'm not deluded in what I'm doing, but I stay focused on it. And then finally, I love this thing. He says, we run for the prize that lasts. What's the prize that lasts? It's when we cross the finish line and Jesus says, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into your master's happiness. And you know, the same idea of running the race, Paul goes back to this in his very last letter that he writes to his friend Timothy. He says, I have run the race and I finished it. I got there. I kept my eyes on the prize. I didn't get distracted. I trained myself. I stayed diligent. I stayed focused on this the whole time. Now, friends, it's not going to be easy. It's not an easy race. No race ever is. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy to get there. There's a discipline. There's a strictness. There is saying no to some smaller things because I want to say yes to the big thing. Jesus even told us that if we identified with him and stood up for him, there were going to be people that weren't going to help encourage us in running the race. In fact, they were going to do the exact opposite. They were going to discourage us. They were going to try to trip us up. They would persecute us because they don't want us running that race. It's going to be hard. But Jesus, let me take you back to what he said in John chapter 14. He says, I will not leave you alone. I'm sending you this counselor, this spirit of truth, that is going to be with you and remind you of the race that you're running and keep you focused on that prize. So, friends, I think that we can sum it up this way, because I really, it comes down to this. Do you want to go home? Do you want to finish this race? I do. I want to go home. I want to be with Jesus forever. Well, Jesus told us the end comes when all of the nations have heard the gospel. So I think we can sum it up like this. Do you want Jesus to come again and take us home? Then we have to finish the race. And we finish the race by telling everyone about Jesus. We tell everyone about Jesus. So if I could, I want to break this down for you in just 3 words. Listen, here's the bold claim. Jesus says, I'm giving you my authority. If Jesus gives us his authority, don't you expect that he wants a return on that? He didn't say, I'm just going to give you my authority and you can just, do with it whatever you want to. You can just put it on a shelf and just say, well, there it is over there. He wants us to do something with us, with that authority. And that is, therefore, go and make disciples. Tell everyone. So let me give you 3 words. The 3 words are go, pray, and send. You go to people that need to hear the gospel. You pray for those who haven't heard the gospel yet. You pray for those who are going to faraway lands to preach the gospel, and you help send those missionaries to places that you can't go. Listen, I have some friends of mine that are missionaries. They've been called to countries that I haven't been called to. And I'm praying for them, and I'm financially supporting them to help send them there. But just by the same way, there are neighbors and family members and coworkers that they haven't been sent to, so I have to go to them. All of us need to be going. We need to be praying. We need to be sending, not letting up and running a victory lap, not just coasting because I'm near the end of the race, but running until I've crossed the finish line, until Jesus says, that's it, I'm taking you home. You've crossed the finish line. Or Jesus says, that's it, all the nations have heard, and I'm now coming back to take everybody home with me. If you want to go home, run the race. Don't let up. Jesus has given you his authority to run this race well, to tell everyone about him, to go, to pray, to send. Let's be busy about doing that. God bless you, friends. I love you.